So today, Emily, Phoenix, and I are going to be giving a presentation on showing you a little bit of behind the scenes of what goes on here when we put together exhibitions. Actually, I'm going to start my timer here. So, I think when a lot of people come to museums, galleries, you see the work that's on the wall, but it's really kind of hard to imagine how everything even just got to being in the gallery space and up on the wall and all the steps that it takes to get to that point. So I'm going to do the first half, and then I'm going to be talking about my portion of my job, which is the exhibitions portion. Emily's going to be talking about object preparation and everything that goes into that. So I'll go ahead and get started, and then we'll switch about halfway through. Developing an exhibition is a multi-step process. I'm going to start with what some may consider, I hesitate to say the boring stuff, because I don't want curators to think that I think that their work is boring, because I don't. But when you're looking at a like a spreadsheet or a piece of paper on a project, that's not very exciting to look at, but it's an important part of the process. So once we get through that, we'll get into some more of kind of the fun things that we dive into design and installations. And this is Emily and I here installing some vinyl for the Indian Cinema exhibition that was up last year. So the first step is curators submitting proposals to the exhibitions committee. The exhibitions committee will determine the feasibility of the exhibition and where it best fits on the calendar. Depending on which gallery, we're typically 2 to 3 years out in the planning process, and we do 2 to 3 exhibitions in each of our galleries. And I'm specifically focusing on the galleries that are in the 1989 building, not the galleries that are in the mansion. So, meetings. This is exactly what our meetings look like. We are all just so thrilled. After the exhibition has been approved, we do a series of meetings, starting with a large group that's comprised of the various departments around the museum, where the curator provides background information and context about the exhibition. And then from there, we have smaller groups of meetings to discuss development. So like, what are the possibilities for fundraising and support for the exhibition, merchandise, what are the things that we can sell in the store, publications, is there a book project along with the exhibition? And engagement, which is a huge part of what we're doing here and is a huge part of my job. And that's really kind of how we'll provide information about the work or the artist that's in the galleries beyond just the objects on the walls. So things like we do our audio tours, podcasts, rack cards, kind of takeaways, hands-on activities, anything like that is kind of engagement beyond the artwork. And also what types of programming that we're putting on. So whether it's artist talks or curator-led tours or our renegade tours that we've been doing recently, really any type of programming around the exhibition is just started to talk about in those early stages. After we've had a chance to meet in smaller groups, we then fill out a production schedule. This helps us track all of the things that need to happen in an exhibition to get posted to the website, from posting it to the website up to the actual physical installation of it. So there's a number of different steps here, and I know that these boxes aren't checked here, and it makes it look like we haven't gotten to a lot of these things yet, but I took this screen capture a long time ago, so many of those boxes are checked now, I promise you on that. And I just want to point out the first item on the production schedule here is the checklist. And the checklist, along with the production schedule, these are the ways that we communicate across different departments. That way, we're all sharing the same information. We're all working with the same knowledge. So this is an example of how our checklists are typically laid out. Again, this is another document that allows us to communicate and track what objects are in an exhibition. It allows us to, if we need to find the titles or the makers, medium size, attribution, all of that information is here, and that's used, not just curators, but the publications team needs that, PR needs that, so it's really kind of information that it needs to be shared widely. And this is actually a small sampling of some of the stuff that you will see in the upcoming History of Photography rotation that's going to be curated by Lisa Hostetler and the PPCM students that will open the beginning of next month, that is focusing on the moon, since it's the 50th anniversary of the moon landing and moonwalk. So once a close to final version of a checklist is produced, we create one-to-one scale models that are made for each object with the specs that are provided by Emily and the curator for the frame. So you can see how small the little, that's supposed to be a one-to-one representation of what that framed object would look like. We then put them in our gallery minis and start moving things around to see what will fit and what will need to be cut, where objects will go, the placement of text, display cases, and movable walls. All of this helps us get a sense of how the flow of the space and how the visitor will move through the space. Or at least we're hoping to figure out how, attempt to guide the visitor through the space. This is a little sneak peek at the upcoming Art of Warner Brothers exhibition, as Jared Case and I are working on laying that out right now. So those big, colorful images of bugs and Elmer Fudd are, those are actually going to be large projection screens that are going to be through the space, and they'll be playing some of the cartoons. So it's going to be a really fun show. So to give you a sense of what the design process is like, I'd like to walk you through the design and implementation of the Dreaming in Color exhibition, which was a personal favorite of mine to work on. And it was definitely one of our more elaborate exhibitions to pull off from a technology standpoint. So the process started off with us meeting with the curator, Josh Umibe, who he was guest curating. And Josh lives in Michigan, where he teaches at Michigan State University, who ruined my NCAA bracket. And since he wasn't as readily available, I'm from Ohio, so I can't root for any Michigan team. Since he wasn't readily available, as our curators here are, a lot of our communication happened through email, through Skype conversations, we did bring him here once, though, and he did a presentation and kind of talked to us a little bit about his vision for the show. And based off of some of the things that Josh was saying and some of the work that he had shown, this clipping from the Turconi collection really stood out to me as he was talking about it, and I kept thinking about it. I kind of used this image as a starting point to think about the design of the space. And made a 3D sketch of the layout in a 3D rendering software called Google SketchUp. So what you're seeing here is the front of the project gallery and how guests would see the gallery as they're approaching it. And notice you can kind of see through the glass doors there. There's this large projection in the background, and really that's to help pull the viewer into this space and place the viewer in. Here you have an aerial perspective that shows some of the color choices I was thinking about and how the layout of the multiple projected images in the second room would kind of start to lay out. Here's another angle just showing a little bit more of that second room and how I was envisioning the layout of the projections. And this is how I was communicating when we're working with a guest curator. So actually having these miniatures of the gallery and I send them the 3D rendering software, and they can get that experience of what it would be like to kind of move through the space. And here you can see how the original sketch ended up being translated to the physical space. So you notice that the colors that I had mocked up before ended up, that's what we ended up using. As you were entering the gallery, those colors were pulled from the film clipping above with the smoke and the kind of turquoise color and the pink in the smoke, and really kind of had this ethereal effect So yeah, that's kind of working from the kind of beginning sketch up to the actual implementation. So with the basic design of the space finalized, I moved on to the logistics of making the installation actually work. This diagram helped us coordinate with our IT department on which video files would go to which projector. Pre-planning and running cords and everything was paramount. Being able to do all of that ahead of time, because we have 2 weeks to turn the space over. So all of that planning needs to happen ahead of time. So during those 2 weeks, we can get right in the space and actually make it work. So one of the things that I didn't plan for, and here you can see how the original sketch of that space ended up playing out. And you can see up here where the projectors are up on the ceiling. And one of the things that I didn't plan for is that all of these projectors were the exact same model projector, which means they all work off of the exact same remote control. And that just didn't cross my mind as I was planning this. So the first night when security goes to close the exhibition down, they turn one projector off, and then they turn another projector off, and that turns another one on and another one off. So it was, they kind of just gave up on it. And so I had to come up with a tactic to be able to avoid that hair-pulling experience for them. So I kind of was like scrambling around trying to think of what I could do. And what I did was I had one of these empty paper boxes down in my office, and I thought, okay, well, if we get a remote and we attach some Velcro on it and just keep it in the box, and they point the box directly up at the projector, it'll control the infrared sensor, and they can target each specific projector. So it worked. And that was just kind of a little troubleshooting in the moment. And I mean, and that's like, there's always stuff that, we try to plan for everything that we can, but there's always stuff that comes up that we have to troubleshoot in the moment, or even after the exhibition opens. You might not see it, but we're still working on trying to make the exhibition run, or turn off, I guess. So I got to move a little more quickly here. The Robert Cumming exhibition that we did a few years ago was another favorite exhibition of mine to work on. I felt a personal connection with the artist's work. I really loved the playfulness of his work. And he had this playfulness, and he used this element of deception in his photographs, but still also at the same time kind of revealing the trick in the photograph as well. And I really kind of liked that visual play that he was working with. So as we were starting to think about, one of my favorite things to do here is working on the title walls. So those are the walls that kind of like introduce the exhibition that are out in the peristyle area that you'll see in a second here. And so this was actually another guest curated exhibition, and the curator was, she flew in from LA. I had a meeting with her at 9 a.m, and I needed to have design sketches for her for the title wall that morning, and I had nothing leading up to that. I didn't have any ideas. And that night I actually had a dream about what I wanted to do, and I woke up in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m, and I start sketching out, and I have this idea, and then I pitched it to her, and she loved it, and so we ended up going with it. But it kind of, it looked, I looked a lot at Robert's work, and I use it as an inspiration to kind of think about how he's conceptually approaching his work, but then how can we kind of like translate that to the design of the exhibition. So, thinking about sourcing color or patterns. So what we came up with, and I don't know if any of you remember this, was a relatively kind of simple design. The typeface was taken from his book. And what we did was, in a way that Robert kind of uses props and things to hold other things up in the exhibition to kind of create this illusion, we used this C-stand that's used, photographers use these in the studio to hold up props or reflectors or whatever they need to kind of pulled up off camera, and kind of integrated that actually into the design, showing the hand of the trick in the design, and it's kind of just held the word objects off of the wall a little bit and made it kind of look like it was like cut out of the wall, and it was, we had a piece of drywall, cut it down so it kind of looked like it had this rough edge, but really just kind of using the artist's work as an inspiration and playing off of that. Photography in America's national parks, this was kind of a no-brainer, with the Kodak picture spots as an inspiration, kind of thinking about creating picture spots, selfie spots, as a way to introduce the exhibition. And similarly, we did some research on parks that are, or signage that's actually in the national parks, and the sign here was kind of loosely based off of those designs. So, drawing the visitor into the space again, using color blocking to identify separations between different sections. So here you can see this green stripe here. We use that. We would always use in this exhibition. We were using this green color, which is very earthy, but it helped identify, break up the different sections that were put together by the curator, and that color was then kind of spread throughout the space. Now, on the movable walls, so the walls kind of in the middle of the room, most of them were painted green, except for this one. Can anybody guess why that wall was not painted green? Well, because this photograph would have looked awful on top of a green wall. So, and that's kind of part of, as we're like thinking through the planning, like, but the green on the side of it helps tie it into the other movable walls. But thinking about all of those things through, like if we're using color, how does the color of the photographs interact with the color of the artwork? Because we certainly don't want those things conflicting. A matter of memory, this was another intro wall that I really liked. The type for a matter of was a 3D lettering that really kind of got to this idea of matter, of objectness. It had some substance to it. It had depth to it. And then the word memory was actually projected onto the wall. So it had this very ephemeral quality, and just really it only existed as light, and kind of the kind of ephemeral nature of memory was kind of a catalyst for that design. So installs are always a collaborative effort between exhibition prep, object prep, and facilities. This includes patching walls, sanding, painting, hanging framed objects, putting objects in their cases, lighting to conservation standards and recommendations, installing graphics, vinyl, and text, or implementing creative installation concepts. So I'm going to run through a couple of our more complicated installations here quickly, so I can leave enough time for Emily. So this was from the Matter of Memory exhibition. This was Ellen Carey's multi-chrome pools. These were large Polaroid pools that the artist had made. And this is Emily and I preparing to install them. So putting plastic out on the carpet so that we can lay the works out and not have them directly in contact with the dirty carpet. And Emily vacuumed the carpet. It was not dirty, but we just took the extra precaution to put plastic down. And you can see we're kind of rolling them out now. We're starting to place them in a row, so we're going to see how they're exactly going to kind of line up and fit on the wall. And they have sheets of interleaving over top of them to protect the surface. So here's Emily. The way that we ended up installing these was because they were so delicate and couldn't be handled. You didn't want to be moving them around, rolled out, and potentially having dents or bends or creases in them. Each one was rolled up individually, and then we had two people up on ladders slowly rolling them down the wall and then they were push pinned into the wall. Now, we normally don't put push pins through anything. I'm sure you probably noticed that. This was the artist's choice. There were already holes in the object, so we were not creating any new ones. And we just kind of slowly worked it, rolled it down the wall. And again, this is like, it might seem like it's overkill, but we have to be very delicate with this object and make sure that we're trying to keep the integrity of it and keep it safe throughout the process of installing it. This is Ferricarapetion's Riot Police. Was I thought I had in my note. I think it was like 8 feet by 13 feet, I believe. So very large framed work with no glazing on it. That means there was no plexiglass, no glass, nothing to protect the surface of it. And that's why you see the stanchions in front of the piece here. And it's not that we don't want people, well, I guess, yeah, we don't want people to get close to it. So we knew that it was going to be difficult getting the object into the gallery. So Emily and her team built this really amazing adjustable frame that could be used to move the object around. When it came into the museum, we didn't know which side of the truck it was going to come in on. We wanted it to come in on the other side of the truck because it came into our loading dock. We have a small loading dock. That forced us to have to actually unpack the crate on the truck. And to be able to actually get it out to fit it into the space. From there, we got it onto the A-frame, had it on its angle, and we brought it into the gallery. Preparing to put the cleat on the back of the work that's going to hang from. So all the while people are doing the working with measuring, we have to have everybody else holding this 13-foot framed work up. Here we are lifting it onto the wall. Again, major group effort. And Andrew, I'm just going to skip the sound. Let's not worry about it. There's not really much you can hear. But there's just a couple videos here of us pulling the object down. Notice we have foam blocks on the ground that helps to just try to protect the edge in the bottom of the work. This was a ton of fun. And we did all of this measuring ahead of time, so we knew it was going to be able to actually fit into the gallery, but we knew it was going to be very tight. So protecting the edge, having the packing carpet or cloth down to make sure that the bottom edge, if we needed to kind of slide it through, we could. And then actually lifting it onto the support. Let's see who this was. You can see how massive this is. Us just getting it out of the gallery was not an easy task. And unfortunately, we had to do this during operating hours. We try to usually do these types of things when the museum's closed, but because of the timeline that we were on. So the folks that were here visiting that day got a little preview of us doing our jobs. And again, another one where it's just barely fitting through our doorways, using cardboard to help protect the edge in case it hits the floor there. And then packing the crate back up, which we did in on our loading dock. And getting it back onto the truck. It was very heavy. So then, and many of you may remember Lorna Beaver's tapestry. This work was about, it was about 22, 23 feet long by about 10 and a half feet tall. we actually had to build a new wall to accommodate for this work in the space because the wall didn't go all the way up to the ceiling before. So the work wouldn't fit on it. So we built a new wall, and Emily devised really brilliant plan to be able to bring the work in the gallery. So she brought it in, had it rolled up. Well, first of all, I should say that she seamed the entire thing together herself and did a beautiful job on it. And then had it rolled up on these tubes, and that's how it was transported from the lower level 2 here up to the gallery. Then we laid out black paper on the floor, and you can see these kind of metal pieces on the wall here. Those were these little metal kind of cleats, I'll call them, that the work would then get attached to as it was going up. So rolled out the black paper so we could start to roll the work out into the gallery. Let's see how big it is. There was a piece that had to be attached in the gallery. So here's Emily attaching that final piece. Doing a really fantastic job. And here we are. We've got it all rolled out. We're like, okay, now what? So the next step is we attached started to attach the cleat. And this was made beforehand, and it was a long stretches of a long piece of wooden cleat that had pieces of metal attached to it that would then, the piece was then hung with magnets to the metal all across the top. So we're just prepping that. You can see the little black dots there. Those are all the magnets that held that entire piece up, which is pretty amazing. And then we rolled the piece back up so we could actually get it to the wall. So, that's Lorna's in the middle there with the blonde hair, helping us roll the work up so we could get it up to the wall. And then we got everybody up on ladders and had a group on the floor, group up on ladders, started handing it up, started to unroll it. The top folks were bringing the piece up to the metal pieces at the top. We hooked it in and then start putting the magnets on, and the finished piece. You definitely, when you see it, you totally miss all of that kind of craziness that went into it. I'm going, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip a couple things really quickly and just talk about, if you haven't been up to our camera Obscura before, I really encourage you to do it. Today's maybe, if the sun comes out today, it'll be a good day. But this was actually George Eastman's closet / bathroom, Jesse. Thank you. That we turned into a camera Obscura, and this was the in process here of we did a lot of testing. We had to figure out what the focal length was going to be of where we were going to build this wall, and where we would, and what type of eyeglass lens we would use, and so this was as we were in construction for the camera Obscura. And this was a picture I took inside of there last week that I kind of stitched together here at the West Garden. I've kind of been obsessing with camera Obscuras lately, so I'm just gonna leave it here. So once the install is complete, the work really doesn't stop there. We have to constantly maintain the galleries every week. We're cleaning the floors, frames, display cases, any other component of the exhibition that might require upkeep. Many of our exhibitions involve a lot of technology, like we saw with the Triconi exhibition. And as I'm sure many of you have dealt with in your own lives, technology doesn't always work the way that you have planned for it to. So for us, projectors break down, bulbs burn out, audio stops working, and these are just issues that we often have to troubleshoot throughout the run of an exhibit. In the case of the Triconi exhibition, we got everything up and running, and it looked great. But then, like I said, when security went to close the exhibition, we came into that problem. So there's always these kind of like troubleshooting things that we have to do. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and thank you all for listening.
So as you could see from Nick's presentation, he and I work very, very closely together. However, we're actually in separate departments. The object preparators are part of the Department of Conservation at our institution, which emphasizes that our biggest responsibility is to protect objects that are traveling or being exhibited from physical damage or to minimize chemical deterioration during the time that they're on display. The way that we do this is through framing, through book cradles and supports for objects in vitrines, as well as through packing and crating objects that are being shipped. While the outward appearance of frames are important, what makes the work that we do challenging is finding the best way to preserve each unique object, and most of the techniques that we use to preserve the collection actually are unseen by visitors. So there's a lot going inside a frame that can't be seen. A typical frame package includes around 18 different kinds of materials, and they're all carefully chosen for a specific purpose, and all are required to be safe for photographic objects. While the frame itself is chosen for aesthetics and its ability to physically protect an object, the materials inside the frame package are largely chosen for their ability to reduce chemical deterioration. One of the biggest and most common mistakes that I've seen in framing has been pressure-sensitive tapes or adhesives being applied directly to an object to hold it in position in the frame. Adhesives, even those that are marketed as archival, can be difficult or impossible to remove. For this reason, we use a variety of techniques to safely mount works of art in a frame without directly applying adhesive to the objects. Ideally, an object is securely attached inside a mat, but is also easily removed so the damage doesn't occur if someone needs to take it out later. The two techniques that we use most frequently are folded paper corners, which you can see on the left being used to attach some unmounted album prints, and sink mats, which an example on the right shows mounted, I believe they're POP prints that were on very curved board that we had to create. It's sort of like a pocket inside that mat to house the object. A technique that we use less frequently, but that can be helpful when mounting some trickier objects, are edge strips. In this case, I was matting and framing an album page. The page not only had a really delicate and worn out edge, and as with a lot of older paper that was used in albums, it's quite brittle as well. But it had a hinge where the page would have been bound into the album. So I made narrow strips along 3 of the sides to allow as much of the page to be visible in the window of the mat as possible without actually seeing those edge strips. And then I used a wider strip on the side where the hinge was to support this line of weakness in its structure. There are times when being able to see an object in its entirety is important to understand its context. So some of those other examples were over-matted so that you can't actually see the edge of an object. One way that we can show an object safely without over-matting is to use small bent pins covered in a kind of heat-shrink Teflon tubing, which holds the object to a backing board. So that's the example on the left. Though it's more rare, we also use magnets to mount objects like tintypes without any visible mounting method. Another way that the entire object can be shown is by applying hinges for a float mount. Because this technique requires adhesive to be applied directly to an object, this type of mounting is done by our conservators to make sure that the adhesive and the hinge that is applied is reversible. In these images, our conservator, Zach Long, is applying small V-shaped hinges to the 4 corners of the object. Because these hinges are folded behind the object, they aren't visible when the piece is framed and give the illusion of the object floating on the backing board. So I'm bringing this image back up for a minute just to help describe a technique that we use to protect objects from chemical deterioration. You can see kind of that black is the profile of the frame, and then right around all of these materials, we use tape to go around two impermeable layers to create what we call a sealed package. So photographic objects are sensitive to changes and extremes of humidity. Some processes, like albumin, yellow and fade more quickly in high humidity, and other processes, like woodbury types, are prone to cracking in low humidity. And almost all prints with an emulsion are prone to curling or cockling when humidity changes rapidly. So we spend a lot of time and energy on making these sealed packages, which create kind of like a microclimate or its own little environment inside of the frame, with a humidity range of around 35% to 45%. To do this, we first create the back for the sealed package, which is on the left. We use an extremely impermeable material called marble seal, which is attached to a piece of coroplast. A window is added using a material called escal, which is polyester with a ceramic coating on it, so that a humidity indicator strip can be seen inside of the package. This strip makes it possible for us to see what's going on with the humidity over the course of time. The edges of the package have a layer of relatively low-tack tape called P90, which protects the mat from the more aggressive adhesive on the aluminum sealing tape. Corners are individually cut out and carefully folded around the package to eliminate any gaps where air could enter. And all of the tape is burnished really well to make sure that it's tightly adhered. Occasionally, the aluminum tape is slightly visible under the edge of the frame and needs to be carefully trimmed so that it's hidden. The last step is applying labels to identify what humidity the object was sealed at. Adding this label allows us to check the object later and know what it was sealed at so that we can know whether it's changed. In addition to protecting against humidity changes, sealed packages can protect against other factors, such as pollution, insects, and could even protect against damages from disastrous situations, such as a fire in the building or a leak in the gallery, by preventing smoke and water from entering the package. So in addition to framing, we also build supports for three-dimensional objects and cases. In this image, I'm working on a book cradle for an album which was in very fragile condition, using a combination of binder's board and mat board to build the structure. The cradle is then covered with cloth, and different colors and types of cloth can be used to work with the design of an exhibition. So that's something that Nick and I would go back and forth on and the curators as well, to make a decision on the appearance of the supports. Oh, always. When a spine is in disrepair, ideally we would be able to conserve that object, but often because of financial reasons or time constraints, it may not be possible. So it's really important to create a book cradle that will support whatever structure remains. So the album on the right was actually broken along the spine, and the spine was separated. It also had a separated signature. So in all, I believe this album was in about 5 pieces. The cradle was designed to really gently and carefully hold these broken components together so that it could be seen as one object without causing any damage to it. So that's just one example, but there are really limitless possibilities for mounts for objects in vitrines. And this is one area where we can get a little creative and tailor the design to the objects in the exhibition. On the left are cradles that we made with an archival and very clear plastic called PETG. And that allowed us to see the back of the postcards in the Robert Cumming exhibition, where, you get so much more context to that piece than just being able to see one side. On the right are cradles from a previous history of photography rotation that are actually modeled after the design that's used by the photography department at the Met. And then there's an oval mount for a small, I believe it was an amber type, which was a little trickier to figure out. We had to sort of combine soldered brass wires with cloth-covered board to create a cradle that would kind of follow the shape of that object without making it look too heavy. Supports can also be incorporated into wall cases, as with this example that's from the upcoming history of photography rotation. So the mezzotint, and actually this was in the checklist that Nick showed one of his first slides. It was in its original frame, and it was such a delicate object that we decided to just sort of treat that original frame as though it were part of the object and protect it as we would the object itself. So rather than putting hardware on that and hanging it directly on the wall from its original frame, we built this support inside of a wall case that has a little shelf in there, and it has very strategically placed inset magnets that line up with parts of the frame that had some metal in it that would allow it to really like click into place, feel secure, without having anything wrapping around the face of the frame to be distracting. I really love magnets. The same exhibition will also have a mount that contains an LED light panel that will be triggered by a switch and allow a glass slide to be viewed with transmitted light. The trickiest part of displaying things with transmitted light is the amount of light exposure can be harmful to the objects. To limit the light exposure, we've used layers of neutral density filter and diffusion material and have added a button that will greatly reduce the amount of light exposure. We're also going to be logging the amount of exposure over the course of the exhibition so that we can use that information later on when we're determining light levels, when we're doing transmitted lighting in the future. So this particular object, the pigment on the glass, our conservators weren't really sure what type of pigment it was. So she wanted no more than 40 lux for the backlighting, which is really quite low. So it's a fairly subtle effect, but at the same time, it really changes how you see that object, I think. Another fun project I've worked on is developing stereoscopes for exhibitions. For nearly 90 years, from the early 1850s to the late 1930s, stereographs were an extremely popular and widely circulated form of visual media. They played a critical role in the early history of photography, and they're also an important pre-cinema device. The Eastman Museum's collection includes over 47,000 stereographs in a variety of formats that span the history of photography. However, given the size and quality of our collection of stereographs, historically, many years past, it's been sort of changing, but they haven't played that huge of a role in our exhibitions. One reason for this is the difficulty associated with exhibiting stereographs so that they can be viewed in 3 dimensions, which for most people requires the use of a stereoscope. My criteria for building an exhibition stereoscope has been, firstly, accessibility to a quality 3D viewing experience, secondly, preservation of the original object, and thirdly, affordability for institutions of all sizes. My initial attempt achieved my first 2 goals and allowed original stereographs to be viewed without risk to the object while still providing an interactive viewing experience. However, it took several days to build and required experience in woodworking and access to facilities that not all institutions would have. So in this respect, I felt that it was an impractical option for exhibiting multiple stereographs. The design I currently prefer is a balance between affordability and an interactive viewing experience that doesn't compromise the preservation of the original stereograph. It's based on a home space style stereoscope, which was invented in 1851 and was by far the most popular style of viewer during the 19th and early 20th century. Since, unfortunately, that offer on the left is no longer available, sorry, no stereoscopes with your cereal box tops, I found that the most affordable option was to purchase kits and modify them. So on the left, you can see what the kit was intended to look like when it was assembled. I eliminated that front rail, the card holder, and the hinge on the handle, and then attached the handle to the lens board. I made a small wall bracket to hold the viewer and attached a brass chain to prevent theft. I stained the viewers to match our standard frame profile before attaching the leather hoods. The design makes it easy to replace broken parts as needed or to change the color of the wood finish or hood to match the aesthetics of a particular exhibition or object. With the front rail and the card holder removed, the viewer can simply be held in front of a framed stereograph to experience the 3-dimensional effect. The viewer allows a variety of formats to be exhibited, including daguerreotypes, tissue views, glass plates, mounted cards, or digital reproductions. And it also gives the flexibility of framing multiple cards together, or to add a light panel into the frame to exhibit stereographs, such as this image from the Diabulary series, which was intended to be viewed with both reflective and transmitted light. The stereoscope is a practical and affordable option for providing accessibility to stereographs and allowing them to be viewed as intended without compromising the preservation of the original object. So they can still be housed in that same kind of sealed package that we were using for other framed objects, which is a definite plus for preservation. So thank you all very much for coming.